boy, we got a good one today. So, Grand Prix Oklahoma City's this weekend. I will not be attending, which kind of stinks, actually. I've been itching to play Modern for whatever reason. I have all these decks that I want to try, and this is certainly one of them. So, a while back, I think like the beginning of 2016-ish, I top-aided an invitational with Blue-White Thopter Foundry, and didn't play the deck too much after that because it had a few too many issues, but now the format has shifted a lot. There's some new technology that a lot of people have been playing in Logic Knot, and Search for Azcanta was released. So I think it's time to give it another try. And this list is way different than my previous one. The last one was focused on Gifts Ungiven, whereas I think that Gifts is just like a little bit too slow right now, and Gifts for Elishnorn is certainly not one of the better things that you could be doing in this format. So I wanted to try Search for Azcanta, both in this and in Scapeshift, and I'll get to the Scapeshift eventually. But first things first, Thopter Foundry, because it is maybe my one true love. So I have 3 searches, basically because I want to push the limit to figure out like how playable this card is. And I know that there are decks like Blue-White Control where Search for Azcanta has been doing pretty well, and like sometimes Jeskai, but mostly Blue-White. And the cool thing about Search is that you can use it to find your win conditions. And in this case, like just digging through a bunch of cards to find Thopter Foundry or Sword of the Meek to complete your combo is like really powerful. So I like that aspect of the deck. With Logic Knot, instead of things like Remand or Model the Mixture, I think that this deck can actually play more like a hard control deck, which I think is really cool also, because you'll be able to search up actual hard counterspell, and you have the 4 Thought Scours to both turn on the Logic Knots and the Search for Azcantas. Obviously, there's a little bit of dyssynergy there, where like if you have to delve early, it's kind of awkward, but I think that Modern is a format where you get to fill up your graveyard fast enough, especially with fetch lands, that shouldn't really be an issue, but we'll see. It's entirely possible that like a tuned version of this list contains something like 2 Logic Knot, 2 Search for Azcanta, but I really wanted to push those things and try them, even though they don't necessarily work all that well together. I mean, realistically, like you're using Thought Scour to fill your graveyard, and then your graveyard is going to help you do things like cast a Logic Knot or transform Search. So some dyssynergy certainly, but like the cards like Thought Scour and stuff are all working to the same goal, which is to fill your graveyard. And Thought Scour also has the added bonus of putting a Sword of the Meek in your graveyard, which is pretty sweet. So one of the cards that I think is very, very good with Search for Azcanta is Timely Reinforcements. And obviously I've been super high on this card in decks like this, just because it's a very good tool for buying you time. And if you're playing against like Burn or Zoo or like a smaller creature deck where like the soldiers are actually relevant, I think that Timely is a completely serviceable defensive tool. Like it is not that dissimilar to playing something like another like Path to Exile, Sunlands, Blessed Alliance, things like that, as long as the tokens are actually trading for cards. But if all Timely Reinforcements is doing is giving you like 2 or 3 fogs, then you really need to be capitalizing on that by doing something in the mid to late game that overpowers your opponent, which the Thopter Foundry Sword of the Meek combo does. So Timely Reinforcements, like if you go search into Timely Reinforcements and it's good, like you gain the 6 life, you have some blockers and the blockers are relevant, then I think it gives you a ton of time to actually set up, and that aspect is really good. It just means that like you don't necessarily have to kill everything that your opponent is doing. You just have to, you know, buy time until your combo's online. And I think that this deck will be able to do a pretty good job of that. So our defensive package is basically Path to Exile, Timely Reinforcements, a couple sweepers, 1 Wrath of God, 1 Supreme Verdict. The mix is basically just because of Meddling Mage out of the Humans deck. I could see rationales for like playing all Wrath of Gods if there's like Thrun in the format. Izuri is another one. Some things that actually regenerate. And Supreme Verdict is obviously good if your opponents are trying to counter your Wrath of Gods, which might come up against Jeskai. So it's possible that maybe like Supreme Verdict is a little bit better because Jeskai is a little bit more popular, and obviously Geist of St. Traft is a very scary card, but Timely Reinforcements is pretty good against Geist. And then we also have some Engineered Explosives. There is a third color in a dual land to turn on the explosives and make it able to hit 3 casting cost things, which is a thing that I initially overlooked in one of my first deck lists. So don't do that, because there are things that cost 3 that you do need to kill, and it is worth it to play an off-color dual land. I considered splashing some other stuff like Wear Tear out of the sideboard, but I think that the disenchant I have is stronger, so I couldn't really think of anything necessarily that I wanted to splash. Like, it is possible that you could play a Watery Grave and then just, like, sideboard some Thoughtseizes, which could be kind of nice. And, you know, maybe Thoughtseize instead of Negate is probably where I should be. Who knows? But Explosives is pretty nice. You're also going to get into situations where, like, you Thirst for Knowledge away a Sword of the Meek early, and then you later have a Thopter Foundry, but you need an artifact to sacrifice to get back the Sword of the Meek to make the 1/1 token. Timely Reinforcements is also a way to bring back Sword of the Meek, which is nice, but Explosives is maybe a card that I would not play in like this high of a number in my main deck, but we do have an Academy Ruins, we do want like extra artifacts to sacrifice, and I'm not about to play something like Darksteel Citadel. Like, I'd rather have more Field of Ruins if that were the case. So other than that, I think the deck is pretty straightforward. I mean, like, we have Cryptic Command at the top end, which is obviously kind of slow for the modern format, but there are a reasonable amount of decks that actually make pretty good use of this card, and I'm wary about playing a bunch of 4-mana cards, especially like Wrath of God with Cryptic Command is not exactly a combo, because you tap out for Wrath, and then your Cryptic just kind of sits in your hand while they get to reload, which is not great, but Cryptic is another good way to buy time until you actually get your combo. And it's another hard counterspell that can help lock things up against something like Valakut. So, only 2 Celestial Colonnades. I don't like having lands that ETB tapped a lot of the time, so I only have 2. There are certainly going to be some matchups where you want as many of the creature land as you can get because they're pretty grindy, or maybe they have Planeswalkers or what have you, but I have been pretty happy playing only 2 Colonnades in decks like this, and then we have 1 Academy Ruins to return our Thopter Foundries and Engineered Explosives. We had 1 Field of Ruin, which is quite good and deals with a lot of different issues that Modern has to offer in Valakut and the Tron lands. So if those decks are popular, you can certainly play more Field of Ruins, but if those decks are popular, you should probably be playing a different deck. And as for the sideboard, my sideboard is weird. And by weird, I mean it's like incredibly straightforward, which is not something that you usually see in Modern, or at least not in my sideboard. So we have 4 Leyline of Sanctity, 4 Thing in the Ice, 3 Negate, 3 Graph Digger's Cage, 1 Disenchant. And I'm going to change these negates. I don't like them. They're ugly. Too much nostalgia with these old school negates. Uh-oh. What did I do? Get out of here. Boom. Pretty negates. But yeah, like the more I worked on the sideboard, the more I realized that like I only wanted very, very specific things, and the cards that I have in my sideboard are like do double duty in a lot of matchups. Like Leyline is good against Valakut and against Burn. Also good to some degree against like Death Shadow and Jund. Like maybe those are a matchup where you only bring in like 3. Thing in the Ice is kind of my way to shift post board and to be less reliant on the graveyard with Thopter Foundry Sword of the Meek, and just have like this threat that kind of puts them in a pickle, you know? Do they keep in the removal spells? Do they not keep in the removal spells? Like, our main deck is very obviously creature light. Like, we have no actual creatures and just like some 1/1 tokens, really. So Thing in the Ice could be a defensive tool in that it blocks, and it could also just be a thing that clocks them very quickly. Now, this deck does have a lot of cards that are not instants and sorceries, but aside from those cards, like, the deck is all instants and sorceries. So I do think that it will be relatively easy to transform Thing in the Ice with 8 cantrips, but we'll see about that. Negate is primarily the card that I want against the combo-ish decks right now. There's Storm, where I would prefer to have Dispel, but against basically everything else, like maybe not Ad Nauseam, I guess, but like a lot of things where I would just prefer to have Negate. And when playing these blue-white decks that don't have access to discard, it can be kind of awkward because you'll have, like, you know, 2 2-mana counterspells, right? And then on turn 3, you'll only be able to cast 1 of them, so there's a chance that they actually just get to combo off on those turns before you actually get your shields up. So that's kind of why I'm a little wary about Negate versus something like Thoughtseize or Dispel. Maybe Thoughtseize would be good. I don't know. But Negate is kind of like the great catch-all. Grafdigger's Cage is for Dredge and various Collected Company decks. I did want some Graveyard Hate, but I didn't want it to necessarily interact with my Sword of the Meeks negatively. So Cage it is. And then we have a little Miser's Disenchant for just random happenings. You know, like we do have a couple Engineered Explosives. We have Cryptic Command to bounce things, but Disenchant, I think, is a pretty nice catch-all in Modern. Another thing that you usually see in decks like this is like a random Celestial Purge, but I'm not super scared of Death Shadow, and it's not like they have 4 Liliana the Veils, which was like the thing that you really wanted to purge from the Jund decks, so I'm not running that currently. So yeah, my sideboard is super straightforward, but I think it's actually good. So let's battle.